compensation is scary to a lot of HR leaders, to a lot of managers. But luckily, in today's world, there's a lot of great software and tools that can make these things a lot easier so that you don't have to be a comp expert to be able to follow and execute on comp best practices.
You're listening to HR Superstars, a podcast brought to you by 15Five. On this show, we talk to strategic people leaders who are making a meaningful impact in their organizations and shaping the future of work. So get ready to be inspired and discover the secrets behind building high-performing teams and fostering a culture of growth and thriving. The future of HR starts here. Hi, and welcome to HR Superstars. I'm Karina Young, VP of People at 15Five. Now, when organizations talk about pay for performance, it sounds simple. Reward your top performers, recognize impact, and align compensation with contribution. Easy as that, right? But in practice, as most HR leaders know, it is rarely that easy. When performance conversations happen in one system and compensation is decided in another, managers are expected to explain outcomes they aren't always fully shaping or even involved in. And employees are left trying to connect the dots between the work they did, the impact they think they delivered, the impact the company they think they delivered, and ultimately that reward they're getting. Compensation is one of the clearest signals an organization sends in what it truly values. It communicates priorities, shapes culture, and influences retention. Yet too often we treat it as an annual spreadsheet exercise instead of a strategic lever. So today we're exploring what it truly looks like to connect performance and compensation and how HR leaders can move beyond merit cycles to make compensation an always-on driver of engagement, trust, and ultimately business impact. And joining me today is Roger Lee, CEO and co-founder of Comprehensive, a compensation management software that helps companies make better pay decisions. Roger, welcome to HR Superstars. It is so great to have you here. Tell me, what I'd love to ask all of our guests is give me a movie trailer version of your career journey, how you started and how you ended up where you are today.
Great to be here, Karina. Excited to chat and nerd out about compensation. So in terms of my background, I've been an entrepreneur in HR tech for over a decade now. Prior to starting Comprehensive, I started a modern 401k provider called Human Interest, which today serves as the 401k provider for over 40,000 small and medium-sized businesses. I also maintain a website called Layoffs.FYI that's been tracking all the layoffs in tech since COVID. And now I'm working on Comprehensive to tackle the biggest challenge I've run into at my prior businesses, and that's compensation. Over the years, I've been just shocked to discover that even though compensation is one of the key drivers of employee recruiting and retention outcomes, and by far a company's biggest cost, it's still typically spreadsheets that's being used to track and make these decisions. And that meant that far too often, we were flying blind on whether we were paying competitively, fairly, or based on merit. So we built Comprehensive to solve the problem that I face personally and help other companies on the way make better pay decisions without all the pain of spreadsheets.
Roger, tell me, what is it about personal finance and rewards that has drawn you to this segment of work over and over again in your career?
So I've long been really interested about personal finance and helping make a positive impact on people's livelihoods through the workplace. Just knowing that for most individuals, their employers is where they really derive their livelihoods in terms of both their benefits and their compensation. That passion is what led me to start Human Interest to help people save for retirement through the workplace after I realized that the vast majority of small businesses actually aren't able to offer a 401k plan to their employees. And it's what led me to start Layoffs at FYI to help employees who've been laid off be able to find new work from companies that are still hiring. But the biggest opportunity that I've seen so far is around compensation. That's where most people derive the vast majority of their income and their livelihoods. And realizing that companies often are flying blind when it comes to compensation decisions because of ad hoc processes and because of disconnected spreadsheets. It made me realize that this is having a deep impact, not just on the company's goals with recruiting and retention and performance, but also the employees' livelihoods. Imagine a world in which individuals' compensation decisions are being made without full rigor or methodology behind them. Or in the best case scenario, the decisions are sound, but maybe the employee doesn't really understand how those decisions got made. And so isn't able to appreciate what's gone into those decisions. And so my hope with Comprehensive is that we can not only help companies improve their compensation management, but in doing so, really help improve employees' livelihoods as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's incredible because I imagine most employees and organizations feel like whatever's happening in compensation is so disconnected from them, right? It's just happening in some system, some tool that's just, people looking at thousands and thousands of surveys and there's no personal aspect. So I think it's really, really, I think just genuine and authentic to hear the way that you have approached this in your companies and how you approach it with Comprehensive, that really deeply personal impact. So I love you sharing that. You were just talking about companies flying blind. And one of the biggest disconnects I still see even among HR leaders is really understanding around what exactly does pay for performance mean and why does it matter?
Well, on the surface, pay for performance is just having a deeper connection between compensation decisions and an individual's performance, meaning that in some way, compensation decisions are influenced or driven by person's performance. And that's really important for companies because it solves a lot of the goals they have for the business and the reason why they invest money in employees in the first place. They're paying employees to help drive performance and align with their business goals. And so it's important for them to reward high performance, incentivize high performance, and keep high performers.
Yeah. But why do you think they are often operating in silos, right? In the smallest companies to the largest, they still so often performance management and comp are like two separate disconnected areas.
There's a couple of key reasons for this disconnect. And you're totally right that despite best intents, at most businesses, the linkage is not nearly as clear as companies would like it to be. One reason is just a lack of philosophy or strategy around what pay for performance means. And when it's not clearly defined or explained, then the people making pay decisions, whether that's the execs or the managers or even the HR team, are left kind of guessing and trying to apply their own methodology, which could be different from what the company actually wants. I don't need to tell HR leaders, they already know how siloed employee data can be across different systems. You've got people's salary living in one system, typically a payroll or HRIS system. You've got the performance information living in a different system. You've got their pay ranges, often in a spreadsheet. You've got equity compensation in yet a different system. And so to even be able to get a unified picture for an employee, you have to combine all of these different siloed systems together. And for most companies, that's nearly impossible to do. And so it's no surprise then that companies don't feel like they can make a fully formed decision for compensation for an employee, let alone across the whole company, given the state of the data.
And for HR leaders who maybe struggle to communicate up to their execs why solving this matters, what would you say is the biggest organizational risk that ultimately this comes down to when you really start disconnecting these things, like the one thing that really should matter to all business leaders, regardless of function?
The big one is the risk of top performers leaving or becoming demotivated. Every company relies on their highest performing individuals to really drive their business outcomes. And when those top performers are not seeing their contributions recognized or unwittingly falling behind where the market's paying, then the company's running a real risk that those key individuals end up either demotivated or leaving altogether. And top performers are extremely costly to replace. If you think about sort of the time it takes to find a replacement, to train them, to pay for the cost of recruiting that person, the cost is oftentimes 50 to 200% of the cost of the employee's annual salary to replace. But the bigger cost is just the opportunity cost of the business for not meeting their business goals because they don't have the right people to drive those outcomes.
Well, and one thing you said that really resonated with me is this, this idea of when you have your top performers, and oftentimes when they are feeling either disconnected from their compensation or not fairly rewarded, it doesn't show up or you don't hear about it until it's too late, until they've already put in their notice, until you're looking at an exit survey. And maybe they've given some signals to their managers or leaders, but at that point, it's like there's not really anything you can do about it. And so having all of this disparate information makes it really hard for HR to be proactive, to say, Roger, hey, by the way, you have X% of our organization's top performers on your team. They also happen to be in the lowest part of their band for roles they've been sitting in for 2-3+ years. Let's talk about this. Let's do something proactively. I think most people even listening to this may be able to reflect on a time when you offered a top performer more compensation when they asked to leave. And I always say, there is nothing worse for their retention in some ways than that, right? You might get them to stay for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, but the damage in some ways has already been done. And so that opportunity cost you're talking about is so important, not only to the business to actually achieve your goals, but to actually proactively build trust and recognition with that employee by compensating them in a way that matches the impact that they're driving.
Yeah, that's definitely right. The other challenge that I see a lot of HR leaders struggling with is how much to differentiate pay based on performance. The reality is a lot of companies don't truly have pay for performance. It's more about pay within a budget. You hear about this term called, peanut butter compensation, where when it comes to raises, most companies just try to spread the peanut butter evenly across the bread, meaning each employee gets more or less the same raise. There might be some differentiation based on performance rating. Maybe a high performer gets 5% versus 3%. But the question is that enough of a difference? So that's one of the challenges that every company needs to decide on is, how much do they lean into pay for performance? If they really want to lean into it, that likely means a much larger differentiation of merit raises and bonuses based on performance. But of course, a lot of companies aren't quite willing to go there because they still want to be equitable and they don't want to ruffle any feathers. And so there is that inherent tension where it's easy for every company to say, oh yeah, of course I want to pay for performance. But when they think about the trade-offs and what sacrifice that comes with, it's less clear how much they want to lean into it.
Right, exactly. And I think doing that well, the companies I've seen who do pay for performance well, and in the way you're talking about, that there's true differentiation between your top performers, your people who are kind of like just that great solid base, and then those who are not performing. You actually need to also communicate very clearly and transparently with employees up front that this is our philosophy and this is why we have it and this is what we're going to do. This is how we think about compensation. I think where a lot of companies get stuck is they want to make those differentiations, but then they don't say anything about comp. They don't talk about comp to their employees. But what is one thing every employee talks about with each other is their compensation. That conversation is happening whether HR leaders are a part of it or not. And I think for really all leaders, even beyond HR, taking a proactive role in that conversation and really just being upfront and transparent can make such a difference, especially to those top performers. They want to know that you are differentiating for them.
You're so right to point out that the communication aspect is so important. You can have and spend all this time and effort developing the 100% perfect compensation philosophy that perfectly aligns pay with performance, that really aligns with the strategy of your business. But if that strategy and that philosophy is not communicated effectively, all that work is rendered useless. And so getting the right comp philosophy is only half the battle. Communicating that to managers and to employees is the other half. The employees, of course, are the ones who ultimately need to understand how pay decisions are made so that it doesn't feel opaque and so that it can be the motivator and the driver that the business wants it to be. And then manager training is equally important because they're the ones on the front lines having that conversation with the employee and trying to defend and explain comp decisions to them.
Just measuring employee performance is no longer enough. 15.5 helps your HR team take action to maximize performance. With 15.5's performance management platform, you can easily set up review cycles, collect ongoing performance data, track employee goals, and deploy customized campaigns that empower managers to drive growth. Learn more at 15.5.com or click the link in the show notes.
Compensation for most orgs is a once-a-year event. It is one merit cycle. That's the time when everyone's talking about comp, and then the book kind of closes on it until the next one. Why do you think so many orgs still do that in today's workforce? That is, we're so much more agile in every other way of how we work, it seems like, except when it comes to comp cycles. Everyone's still kind of stuck in this status quo.
One reason is just budgeting predictability. I think companies like to align their comp decisions after their annual budget planning. But I think the bigger reason is just that it's a lot of work. Compensation has long been thought of, within HR and broadly across the business as this really manually labor-intensive, error-prone type of work. It's usually done in spreadsheets and not software. And we talk to our customers who come from using spreadsheets to now automating with comprehensive, and they tell us how those spreadsheets used to take over 100 hours over the course of multiple weeks just to run a single merit cycle. In fact, there's this term that many of you probably heard. Those merit cycles are often called comp hell or compensation Super Bowl, just because of how much Herculean effort and time it takes to run those. So it's not surprising that companies and HR teams don't want to run this more than once per year. It's just so scarring for them. And everybody knows that employees don't just think about compensation once per year. Performance and retention risk happen continuously. So by making decisions just once per year, companies run the risk of underpaying an employee, having an employee defect, or being forced to react to with a counteroffer, or exposing themselves to a pay equity issue.
So what would it look like then to think about comp as this always-on strategic tool? What would it make a difference to HR leaders' lives and getting out of comp hell?
The way I think about it is that instead of flying blind, if you use compensation as an always-on tool, then at all times where the business stands with regards to compensation. So imagine a world where an HR leader has a great tool that lets them monitor compensation data quarterly, monthly, daily, in real time. They could detect signals early on, like if there's high performers that are starting to slip below the market, if there's pay compression issues starting to surface, if you have, a drift in your adherence to pay bands, if you have costs that are starting to deviate from your headcount plan. All of those things, imagine knowing before they happen rather than after the fact when it's too late. That doesn't mean you have to act immediately. I don't think any of us are suggesting that comp decisions start being made on a daily basis. Once per year might be too infrequent, but every day might be too much. But at least you have the info at your fingertips to be able to make an informed decision on whether to make a change or to not make a change, rather than being blindsided and having to react because you didn't know the information until it was too late.
Oh, completely. And, it's so interesting because I think one of the things I hear a lot from HR leaders is, well, how do I get a better relationship with my CEO, my CFO? What can I do for them to see me as strategic? But then they also will say things to your point of like, well, but I only think about comp only during the merit cycle or only in this way. And to me, compensation is such an easy bridge to building that strategic relationship with your top C-suite leaders, of being able, to your point, to say like, hey, we're actually trending to be this % off of budget, or we have these changes we should really make. Here's what I'm coming in with data and insights that HR leaders are so primed to be able to triangulate, that it's not just comp, but you have these top performers who might have a comp issue, who you also know from talking to them, sharing about morale issues, how all these things are lining up together. And now you get to really triangulate and be a strategic partner with comp at the center of that, right? The thing that our executive leaders are often thinking about. What's the budget? How are we spending? Especially now for a lot of tech companies. And so it's just such a great way for you as an HR leader too, to be always on in that way, an always on strategic leader, to have compensation part of your toolkit regularly and part of the things that you talk about regularly with your leaders.
That's right. Yeah. Compensation is the company's biggest expense. People are the company's biggest investment. And so every leader wants to ensure that this large investment is producing the right ROI for the business. And so just like everything else in business, it's worth proactively monitoring it and understanding the early signals. And again, doesn't mean you have to make decisions or act right away on everything, but at least you have the information to know when to deviate and act and be preemptive and not let status quo drive how you operate the business.
Yeah. And I think what you said is really important. It is the company's biggest investment. And HR leaders are the protectors of that investment, right? You're the ones who know the most, who understand the value of that investment, how it's being utilized across the organization, what's working and what's not. And I think that's sometimes even just a mindset shift for HR leaders of like, oh, I am owning this investment. This is mine to help either make flourish or not. And so what are you really thinking about on a day-to-day basis? Even if you're not making changes, if you had $30 million invested in anything, you'd probably think about it every day. You'd probably wonder, what's that money doing? Is it doing what I want? What changes could I make? How can I be strategic about it? And I think HR leaders can sometimes just get really easily disconnected from that. Are there any other metrics that you see, Roger, when it comes to comp that really matter to the C-suite, that are things HR leaders should be talking about or thinking about?
I think a lot of the ones that I mentioned are the ones that C-suite would care about. Retention of high performers, linkage between compensation and performance, linkage between that and business goals and outcomes. Of course, there's the compliance side. So every leader wants to just ensure that they don't have any compliance risks when it comes to pay equity or pay transparency. And then ultimately just having a handle on the costs. To your point before, Karina, it's crazy to think about the level of scrutiny that businesses apply to a $5,000 software expense or a $500 flight ticket or hotel stay. But your biggest $30 million line item oftentimes is not scrutinized or doesn't have the same rigor or process or thought behind it as those much smaller expenses.
Oh, yeah, definitely. What are things that you've seen work really well that HR leaders can do to help tell a more compelling business story when it comes to compensation data? Are there any things that you, as like an expert in this field and working with lots of HR leaders, have just seen work really well?
Compensation is one of the strongest culture shaping tools that leaders have, but it's often treated as administrative. In reality, every compensation decision communicates something about what behaviors are rewarded in the business, what outcomes matter to the business, what the company is prioritizing. But a lot of organizations think about compensation and success from a process perspective. Did my cycle finish on time? Did we stay within budget? Did we avoid any errors? And those things are all really important, of course. You need to have really strong execution, and even those administrative things are often easier said than done. But really, to the C-suite, they not only want to know that, but they want to know, did our compensation decisions actually reinforce our strategy?
Yeah. And it's honestly what you were saying earlier, too, about pay for performance, which I think if you as an HR leader are struggling to get your company to really align with pay for performance, it's really just that of like, well, what is it that we are trying to achieve as a business? What's that story we're trying to tell to our employees and what matters? Can we mirror that with our compensation, with our rewards, with what we're offering here as a value prop from our company? Because if you can't do that, then there's something off that needs to be changed and shifted, right? It's going to be really hard to say, hey, we need people to perform at this X level. We want a bar raising organization. We want all of these things out of our top performers, but then this is how we're going to pay and reward you. Like even in a tough job market, people will look at that and wonder, well, maybe I should go somewhere else. Maybe I wonder if someone would recognize my impact more. And for your top performers, you really want to get ahead of that. Because to your point, what did you say? 50 to 200% of a top performer's annual salary is what it's going to cost you to replace and get someone who may or may not be that top performer. You really don't know if they're going to come in and truly replace them.
And the same is true for your question about the, C-suite and the business leaders too. They want to know and be able to connect the investment that they're making in their people to the business priorities and the business goals. And when they can't see linkage between them and can't understand how the money that's being spent on these employees is ultimately going to drive the business's performance, then that causes a trust gap as well.
Yeah, exactly. Roger, what would you say to HR leaders is the one thing they could do starting today to be more strategic about compensation?
I think it's thinking about it from an end-to-end perspective, just to connect all the dots. So, this isn't quite one thing, maybe it's, three things. So first, you need a compensation philosophy or a strategy that informs how you make compensation decisions, ideally tied to your business strategy. So this is the question about, how does pay link to performance in my company? Is it through merit raises? Is it through bonuses? What are those bonuses based on? How do I think about my market positioning and competitive pay? All those things should ideally be expressed in a compensation philosophy or strategy. Then that compensation strategy needs to be communicated. It needs to be told to the C-suite, needs to be told to employees, needs to be communicated to managers, so that everybody understands how the company thinks about compensation and how compensation ties in and is influenced by the other things that the company cares about. And then lastly, you have to be able to actually execute on that strategy. So that means using a proper compensation management software with built-in analytics, not spreadsheets that are disconnected and siloed where you're flying blind. Because again, you might have the best compensation philosophy and maybe that philosophy is actually communicated well across the organization. But if you can't follow through on that because you don't have the data in one place, because it's reactive, because it's on spreadsheets, because it's only like that once per year, then ultimately you're not going to be able to follow through on that perfectly laid out plan and strategy. But if you do those three things, have a comp philosophy, communicate the comp philosophy, execute on that philosophy, maybe using software like 15.5 compensation, which our company comprehensive powers, then I think you're going to be in the percentile of businesses when it comes to having a well-run compensation program and ensuring that really big investment in your people actually translates into business goals.
I love that. Well, not only will you be in the 99th percentile of businesses, but as an HR leader, you're going to be in that top percentage as well of someone who's approaching this in a way that many executives just aren't. I mean, I think what I take away from everything you've shared today, Roger, the biggest thing is the investment you're making in your people through compensation is not something to be left to the whims of sheets in disparate, disconnected systems. That is too precious, too important of an investment to not have a handle on as an HR leader, as a manager, as an HR admin that you can get access to and derive insights from right away. It's just too much. And that having all that information on hand through a tool like Comprehensive gives you that strategic through line, right? That I know what's happening in my business. I can see how this is informing my compensation philosophy. Now I can make decisions that are all connected there. And now I'm building that strategic partnership across the business. And the business trusts me that when I come with matters related to compensation, it's in service of the business and service of our culture. And there's just so much that you can do to really elevate your strategic leadership in HR if you really think about having the right tools that make compensation that always on part of your strategy, that thing that you are always thinking about and always triangulating against all the other information we get funneling in.
Yeah, and we know that compensation is scary to a lot of HR leaders, to a lot of managers, people in general, right? It's got a lot of jargon, it's got a lot of numbers, there's math. It's not the reason why a lot of us, got into our lines of work. But luckily, in today's world, there's a lot of great software and tools that can make these things a lot easier so that you don't have to be a comp expert to be able to follow and execute on comp best practices. And software like ours and 15.5 compensation can now just do that for you. So I think luckily in today's world, compensation is a lot easier than it used to be. And there's a lot of tools out there that can help HR leaders do that.
It is. I think it definitely removes that level of intimidation, right? Like I always try to imagine it like your invisible superhero cape or tools like a Comprehensive, where it's like you get to show up and look your best, be your most strategic, powered by a tool that's doing the heavy lifting for you. Like you have people like yourself, Roger, and your team that you're the comp experts. You're putting all that work into the system. So an HR leader, knowing all the things they have on their plate, can come, show up, deliver the right things they need and derive the right insights without having to spend 4 or 5 years and, only a comp role getting a bunch of certifications. You can actually just have it right on demand.
Yeah, that's certainly our goal at Comprehensive and something that we really take to heart. Most of our customers have a very lean HR team that's stretched super thin. And so we know the most value that we can provide to them is to be able to take that work off their plate and be that expert sounding board for them and just make compensation a lot less intimidating and a lot less painful.
I love that. Awesome. Well, Roger, tell our listeners, if they want to learn more about you, more about Comprehensive, where can they find you?
Sure. Our website is comprehensive.io, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Roger Lee.
Awesome. Amazing. Roger, thank you so much for all of your insights today. This was such an incredible conversation around something that I know is coming right at the end of Super Bowl comp hell for a lot of people, but hopefully we'll put them in that mindset shift that you talked about of how do we think about and integrate compensation into our everyday work across HR. I really appreciate it. Great to have you on. As an HR leader, you have a critical role in managing an organization's most valuable asset, its people. However, despite the importance of your role, other executives may not see the value of having HR leaders at the executive table. This is why we crafted the HR Outcomes Playbook. It's designed to help you close that gap and operate in a way that enlightens and excites the rest of the executive team and shows them that HR can provide value to an organization's bottom line. Get your copy at the link in the show notes now.